Let's see if this can bore the shit out of you. No, I just didn't, as you asked me, I chose one of my course books. This one is Equine Myofascial Kinetic Lines for Professionals. Anatomy, function, symptoms, and treatment. You ready? Okay. Myofascial Kinetic Lines, Chapter 2. 2.1 Human Lines. Different writers have depicted myofascial kinetic chains or lines as rows of interconnected anatomical structures in the locomotion system, which describe motion and stabilization. They are a result of tension lines occurring due to motion patterns. 1. Thomas Myers is, to our knowledge, the first to show these full body lines, which he has described in his book Anatomy Trains 2. He describes 10 lines, 5 from head to toe, or the other way around, meaning that there is no definition of beginning or end. And there is 5 others to the arms and the legs and front and back. The myofascial kinetic lines describe body movement and stabilization from a novel holistic perspective and changes anatomy from static to functional, which includes yet another perspective in the work with moving individuals. It is important to remember that no line works on its own. The lines are interconnected within the locomotion system. 2. 2.2 Equine Lines. 11 equine and up to now 9 canine myofascial kinetic lines have been dissected, isolated, and described. 3, 4. From the Veterinary Anatomical Institute, University of Copenhagen. The superficial dorsal and ventral lines act as antagonists. The SDL induces spinal extension and prevents hyperflexion, whereas the SVL induces spinal flexion and prevents hyperextension. When these two lines balance each other, the spine is in neutral position. Sound flexion and extension movement of the back comprises rhythmic, alternating contraction in the SDL and SVL. Lateral flexion is induced by the left and right lateral line. One line induces lateral flexion on one side and prevents hyperflexion on the other side. Sound balance between the two sides enables the horse to move in a straight line. The SDL, SVL, and LL, the superficial part, envelops and stabilizes the body in flexion, extension, and lateral flexion. The rotation of the spine is controlled by the two helical lines, the spiral line and functional line. The SL has a ventral rotating part also flexing the back and straightening and extending the dorsal part, so the two parts act as antagonists, as does the right and the left SL. The SL is very much involved in walk, tilt, running walk, and canter or gallop. The functional line has a dorsal rotating part, which also extends the spine, and a ventral straightening and flexing part, so those two parts again act antagonistic to each other. There is also a right and a left FL, which balance each other. The FL is especially involved in the trotting movement. The deep dorsal line mainly stabilizes the spine and has also an extending option. By partly unilateral contraction, it will rotate and lateral bend the vertebrae. The right and left side act as antagonists to each other. The deep ventral line has enormous importance as it connects the visceral and somatic body. As it travels in the deep medial muscles of the hind limbs and hypaxial along the spine, it flexes the body, which can act as a protection mechanism for the organs, restricting their normal mobility in case of pathology and need for stabilization. It also has several attachments on the base of the cranium, showing the importance of the craniosacral system. All of these movements, flexion, extension, lateral flexion and rotation, happen at a superficial and a more profound level, and should ideally alternate in balance for the most supple, efficient motion. In static posture, they also need to be balanced for an energy-saving, effortless stand. 2.4 Dysfunction. One or more lines can become static, contracted as a result of trauma, ill-fitting tack, rider problems, etc. in order to protect an area. To counterbalance this, the antagonistic line or the antagonistic part of the helical lines also lose their normal subtle function. Long-standing static concentric contraction of the STL because of an ill-fitting saddle may force the SVL into static eccentric contraction, since they are antagonistic to each other. Another example, which is applied more for dogs, will be a side effect from long-term treatment with cortisol, which produces weak weakness of the abdominal muscles, SVO, and thereby a relative SDL contraction. The longer a myofascial kinetic line dysfunction is present, the larger will the compensatory changes be in the tissue. In most cases, it is possible to restore the normal tension and elasticity in the line, but in some cases, the changes are too severe and the line cannot return to normal. In cases with more severe pathology in the underlying tissue, such as arthrosis, static contraction, and the surrounding tissue protects and compensates for the problem, and so will the implicated lines. When the compensations and the protection mechanisms are released, the patient can worsen because the tissue with the underlying pathology loses its stability. Most often, the tensional compensations are regained after 1 to 2 weeks, and it is then obvious that the method was not appropriate for that particular patient. Before describing the single lines with their anatomy, symptoms, tests, and treatment points, the tests and treatment options in general will be discussed in Chapter